You are crawling on your hands and knees. The air around you is freezing, clammy, and thick with moisture. The smell of wet earth, mold, and millennia of undisturbed silence fills your lungs. The ground beneath you is jagged and sharp. All around you, total darkness rules. It is a profound, pitch-black void that swallows everything. Your only source of light is a flickering torch soaked in animal fat, its dancing flame barely illuminating a few feet ahead of you. You press on, moving deeper into the earth. You are leaving behind the sunlight, the howling wind at the cave entrance, and the safety of your tribe. And then, suddenly, you look up. The torchlight sweeps across a massive, towering rock face, and you see them. Giant bison, fierce, roaring lions, herds of galloping wild horses, massive cave bears. They loom over you, vivid, dynamic, and pulsating with raw power right there on the freezing stone. They were painted in a place where absolutely no one lived. They were painted in a place where the sun's rays could never, ever reach. These were absolutely not paintings meant to decorate a living room. You freeze in your tracks, holding your breath, and you ask yourself, why did they do this? Why did our ancestors, primitive humans fighting a brutal daily battle just to survive, decide to crawl deep into dark, dangerous, predator-infested, suffocating caves just to paint on the walls? They didn't paint their huts. They almost never painted their own faces. They exclusively painted giant beasts, and sometimes bizarre half-human, half-animal creatures. So, in the dead silence of the Earth's underworld, what were our ancestors trying to say to the darkness? Most of us today carry a very naive assumption when looking at ancient frescoes. We casually call it primitive art. We imagine our ancestors, exhausted after a long day of hunting, sitting around a campfire, picking up a piece of charcoal, and doing some fun doodling on the cave wall to make the place look nice. Just like how we hang a landscape painting in our living room to decorate our space. But the reality is the exact opposite. Archaeological science has proven an astonishing truth. The caves containing humanity's greatest prehistoric masterpieces were absolutely not living spaces. Our ancestors usually camped and lived at the shallow rock shelters right at the cave mouths, where there was sunlight and fresh air. But to create those masterpieces, they had to prepare massive torches, haul heavy bags of mineral pigments, squeeze themselves through suffocatingly narrow crevices, and trek hundreds of meters, sometimes miles, deep into the bowels of the mountain. It was an environment starved of oxygen. It was a place teeming with hidden dangers, from lurking apex predators to the deadly risk of slipping into bottomless pits. This was not an interior design project. This was a highly intentional act that demanded a massive sacrifice of effort and immense courage. And without a doubt, it carried a spiritual significance far deeper than the modern human concept of art. Let's examine the evidence to decode this message from the dark. The first piece of evidence is the geographical location of the paintings themselves. When you intentionally conquer your primal fears to enter a space completely isolated from reality, submerged in pitch-black darkness and absolute silence, you are entering a sacred realm. These deep cave walls were not blank canvases meant to display beauty. They were treated as primal sanctuaries. To the ancient mind, the deep cave was likely viewed as the womb of the Mother Earth, or the gateway down into the spirit world. When they ventured deep underground, they were undertaking a spiritual journey, the very first religious rituals of our species. The second piece of evidence comes from the bizarre subjects of the paintings. If the goal of these drawings was simply to record their daily meals, we would see thousands of images of deer, reindeer, or rabbits, the animals that actually made up their main food source. But we don't. In magnificent caves like Chauvet or Lascaux in France, they painted countless lions, woolly rhinos, giant cave bears, and massive bison. They painted apex predators, creatures that were not meant to be eaten, but rather creatures that embodied ultimate power, danger, and majesty. Furthermore, They painted therianthropes, Rhine hybrid creatures that were half human and half animal, like a man with a lion's head or a human wearing deer antlers. These entities simply do not exist in the physical world outside. They only exist in the mind, in dreams, and in the spirit realm. The third piece of evidence carries a visceral, physical connection that will send shivers down your spine. The hand stencils. Right next to the giant beasts, our ancestors left hundreds, even thousands, of handprints. They didn't use a brush. They placed their bare, living hands flat against the freezing rock wall. Then, they took a mouthful of red pigment mixed with their own saliva and forcefully blew that mist of color over their hands. When they pulled their hands away, a negative silhouette remained, permanently blasted onto the stone. That is an incredibly powerful symbolic act. It is a signature. It is a silent scream echoing across tens of thousands of years. I was here. I exist. When they placed their hands on that rock face, they weren't just painting. They were physically touching the boundary of another world, merging their DNA, their spit, and their breath with the very soul of the mountain. The fourth piece of evidence, and one of the most earth-shattering recent discoveries, lies in the caves of Sulawesi, Indonesia. Scientists found cave paintings dating back an astonishing 51,000 years. But what matters isn't just their age, it's the content. The painting depicts a hunting scene where a group of half-human, half-animal figures is coordinating to take down a giant wild pig using ropes and spears. This proves a monumental milestone in the cognitive evolution of humanity. They weren't just painting isolated, static images anymore. They were telling a story. They were transmitting a myth, a tactical lesson, or a heroic epic. That dark cave wall was humanity's very first movie theater, our very first book. They used imagery to bypass the limitations of spoken language, preserving the memories and legends of the entire tribe. And the fifth piece of evidence, which is also the most widely supported theory among scientists: shamanism. Many scholars strongly believe that those ancient artists were not ordinary people. They were shamans, spiritual conduits who connected with the divine. When you are in a pitch-black cave entirely isolated from outside light and sound for hours or days, your brain experiences extreme sensory deprivation. It automatically begins to generate hallucinations. Combined with the rhythmic echoing of striking stones, oxygen deprivation, and potentially the use of psychoactive plants, these shamans would enter an altered state of consciousness. In a deep trance, they would see the spirits of animals moving in the dark, stepping right out of the rock itself. When they picked up their pigments to paint, they were essentially tracing the spirits. They were actively hallucinating, attempting to communicate with the underworld, asking the animal spirits for permission to hunt, or begging for the tribe's protection. Now, let's rewind the tape of time. Close your eyes and reconstruct a cave painting ritual from 30,000 years ago. You and 3 other members of your tribe are preparing for the sacred rite. You carry heavy torches soaked in animal fat. One person holds a large seashell, overflowing with bright red pigment ground from iron ochre, alongside chunks of pitch-black charcoal taken from last night's fire. You begin to squeeze through a claustrophobic crevice, crawling on your belly over wet stone, leaving the familiar world behind. The air grows thick, and the pungent smell of burning fat fills your nostrils. When you finally reach a massive vaulted cavern that feels like a natural cathedral, everyone stops. The absolute silence of the cave wraps around you. Then, someone begins a low, rhythmic hum deep in their throat. Another person takes 2 stones and strikes them together, creating a booming, rhythmic echo that bounces off the walls like the giant heartbeat of the earth. The artist steps forward. He doesn't need to look at a live animal model. The image of the giant bison is burned deep into his mind, vivid down to every muscle fiber. He smears black charcoal on his fingers, tracing flawless, sweeping curves onto the rough rock. He perfectly utilizes the natural bulges and dips of the cave wall to form the swelling belly or the muscular thigh of the beast, creating a chillingly realistic 3D effect. Under the flickering, dancing light of the torch that wavers with every breath, the paintings refuse to stay still. The shifting shadows make the horses and lions look like they are actually galloping, breathing, and coming alive right there on the freezing stone. And then the artist places his hand flat against the wall, fills his mouth with red ochre, closes his eyes, and blows with all his might. His breath merges with the darkness. When the ritual is complete, you pack up your things. You are not moving in here to live. You turn your backs and walk out, leaving those giant beasts behind in the endless, eternal dark, guarding the secrets of the mountain. But this is where things get truly bizarre and mind-bending. They didn't just paint these walls once and forget about them. Radiocarbon dating has revealed a jaw-dropping phenomenon. A single cave wall can contain dozens of overlapping images, and the time gap between the person who painted the first animal and the person who painted the last can be thousands of years. Just try to comprehend the magnitude of that. Thousands of years. Hundreds of generations were born, lived, and died. But somehow, their descendants continued to crawl back into that exact same pitch-black cave, found that exact same rock wall, and painted right over the old animal spirits, or added new ones alongside them. This proves that to them, the cave wall was not an inanimate physical surface. That wall was a fragile membrane, a veil dividing the world of the living above from the spirit world, inside the mountain. When they painted on it, when they placed their hands upon it, they were physically touching another reality. They were having a conversation with ancestors who had painted in that exact spot millennia ago. Let's do a direct comparison between ancient art and how we consume art today. Today, when we paint a picture or capture a beautiful photograph, what is the ultimate goal? To hang it in the most well-lit spot in our house, to display it in a gallery under brilliant spotlights, to post it on social media, craving likes, comments, and praise. Our art is deeply personal, heavily driven by ego, public recognition, and sometimes commercial transaction. Our ancestors were the exact opposite. They created the most monumental masterpieces, shedding sweat and even blood in a place where virtually no one would ever see them. They painted in total darkness, by the flickering light of a tiny flame. They didn't paint for applause. They didn't paint for interior decoration. They painted for a reason infinitely deeper and more sacred. They painted to connect with the souls of all living things, to honor the terrifying power of nature, to speak with invisible supernatural forces, or simply to anchor the memories, the stories, and the very existence of an entire tribe against the cruel, erasing flow of time. Today we have brightly lit museums that expose everything to the naked eye. Our ancestors had dripping caves cloaked in eternal night, and that terrifying, suffocating darkness was the safest, most sacred vault they could choose to entrust with the most important images of their species. We, the humans of the digital age, will never know exactly, 100%, what our ancestors were thinking when they closed their eyes, pressed their bare hands against the freezing stone, and blew that red dust. But there is one undeniable, timeless truth. They carried within them a fierce, overwhelming desire to leave a mark. They didn't choose to leave their mark on the sand, where the waves or the morning wind would easily wipe it away. They chose to leave their mark on solid rock, deep inside the womb of the earth, where time itself seems to freeze, and where utter silence protects everything from the erosion of the universe. The next time you look at a photograph of an ancient cave painting on your computer or phone screen, please don't just scroll past it as if it's the meaningless doodle of a primitive caveman. Pause for just 1 second. Try to imagine the smell of the burning torch. Try to hear the echoing sound of dripping water. Try to hear the heavy, frantic breathing of the primal artist in the dead of night. They didn't paint those images for us, the people living tens of thousands of years later, to see. They painted them because, in that sacred subterranean moment, capturing a story and touching a soul was far more important and magnificent than their own physical survival on the surface world above.